to Talking with Tatchell. Everybody's discussing the Blair legacy, but really I think it should be the Blair-Brown legacy. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, despite their political differences, worked side by side to bring the New Labour project to fruition. Gordon Brown was Tony Blair's Mr. Moneybags, funding all those policies. He was the one who sat around the cabinet table, nodding and not dissenting from the many fatal errors. So with me to discuss the Blair-Brown legacy, and indeed the future square-up between David Cameron and Gordon Brown at the next general election, is feminist and Mail on Sunday columnist Suzanne Moore.
Hi,
I want to start, Suzanne, by asking you, what's your view about the key, issues that define the Blair-Brown decade?
Well, it's very difficult to look at all the social changes now, I think, and wonder, which things Blair was absolutely responsible for, and some things would have happened anyway. I mean, we can say, yeah, Iraq, he's responsible for that. On the good side, minimum wage and civil rights partnership, civil marriage. But I think a lot of this kind of dislocation and disconnections that have happened in society would have happened to whoever was leader, because we've gone through 10 years of quite rapid social change, technology, the sort of culture of celebrity, all those things. And I don't think we can blame him for everything that's gone wrong.
When you say social dislocation, what do you have in mind?
Well, I'm struck by how at the end of 10 years, after the sort of optimism of 1997, this idea, well, there is such a thing as society and we're going to put everything back together. I mean, I feel that everything is actually more fragmented than it ever was, that the gap between rich and poor, I mean, I know that's debatable, but I mean, many figures are showing us that it's greater than ever. We've got a super rich class that's pulled away. We've got an educational underclass. We've got people living in kind of ghetto-type situations. And I don't feel that this government has really addressed those problems properly at all. And I think many people feel very disappointed.
We don't think that things have got better, if not as good as we'd hoped, that, to some extent, schools and school performances by pupils are improving, that, waiting lists are down in the NHS?
Well, people, it's that thing, if people say, did you wait less in the hospital? They say, yes, I did. I didn't have to wait so long. Do you think the NHS is improving? No, I don't. Why do people feel so distrustful of where the changes have been good? Isn't that some of the fallout from the war, and feeling sort of not listened to and distrustful of all politicians? So that even when politicians are saying, look, we have made things better, or we've brought in tax credits, or we've done this, people say, no, you haven't made any difference to my life. And there isn't much feeling of optimism, which is why someone like Cameron can come in with this happy clappy kind of we're all going to save the NHS, and people are going to fall for it.
I mean, how much responsibility do you place with Gordon Brown as opposed to Tony Blair? Because obviously Blair and his coterie had many of the key ideas, but Brown was the person who provided the money to make them happen.
Well, we just don't know, do we? I mean, there's all the rumours about what Brown didn't agree with but then funded, I mean, the war or whatever. I don't think we know what Gordon Brown thought about a lot of things. We were just sort of fed the idea that he was somehow disgruntled in the background, and the idea that because he was blocking Blair on every domestic issue, Blair had to sort of then become the messiah of the sort of international, on the international stage. I think we're only going to know some of that stuff now, when we see Brown supposedly sort of out of his chains. I don't think people actually. I think we project. I mean, I certainly projected onto Brown over the last few years what I thought he might be, what I hoped he might be, and it was all the hopes that Blair didn't fulfil. So I thought, oh yes, Gordon will do it when he comes along. Gordon is the man. But over the last 2 or 3 years, I think, like a lot of people, I've increasingly thought, well, they are one and the same, or they are very sort of, connected. And I don't think Brown is going to be this great saviour of anything like socialism or the left. I mean, I think he's going to push through that kind of quite Puritan work ethic thing that is quite, will appeal to some people, but it doesn't appeal to me.
I think it's interesting. I had a very similar perception, a few years ago. I thought, I wish Blair would go. And Gordon Brown won't be perfect, but at least he'll be a bit better. Now, having seen, with like the air passenger duty, supposedly a measure to tackle climate change, but in fact, that nearly £2 billion has just gone into the exchequer and disappeared, and has not actually been used to fund energy conservation or renewable energy. On the abolition of the tax dividend on pensions, and the general chaos of pensions in this country. People have put in money believing they were saving their retirement and ending up being shortchanged by companies who've done the fiddles or whatever. He has presided over all of that.
Yeah, and I think that it is a sort of fantasy to sort of disconnect him from the party, and that's what's happened. He's done it himself. I mean, I'm sure he's encouraged some of the rumours, but at the moment, I mean, his own people go around saying, well, he is getting better. He is going to be a bit more human. He is, and the new spin is sort of no spin. Now we're going to get the authentic person after the kind of just the TV presenter that Tony Blair was. We're going to get this real person. But
that spin too.
Exactly. It's a new spin, is that we've got this authentic person, but he's just as devious, and I mean, I don't know if he's any more real.
I think to me, one of the things that summed up my uncertainties and fears about him was taking 2p off the basic rate of tax, but then abolishing the 10% rate, which of course hit low-income people the hardest.
But he just sort of bamboozles everybody with that, didn't he, for about, a few hours until everyone worked out the figures.
I think a lot of people felt that was just like, that was a dishonest sleight of hand.
Well, I think that, it all just feeds into that image of Brown as sort of in the corner, scribbling away and not letting anyone else see what he's doing, and then sort of pulling these rabbits out of the bag. People don't trust, they don't trust Brown. I mean...
And the polls are not looking good.
No. I mean, I think it's amazing that there was a poll recently that asked people who was more in touch with ordinary experience, everyday ordinary people's experience, and Cameron beat Brown. And then if you look at Cameron's background, we kind of know that's not true, but he does convince people that he's one of them, and Brown just doesn't have that ability. And you could say, well, it's good, I mean, we've had enough of that, everyman thing that Tony Blair did, and it's important just to have a conviction politician like Brown. But I think, one of the legacies of Blair is, they have to be bloody good at persuading people that they're talking to them and that they're listening. And Brown is very good at sort of monologuing. That's it. But, there's not much of a sense of dialogue.
Mm. A lot of people are picking up on his downness and he's dull and he's boring. I don't really care.
No.
As long as he delivers for the benefit of the country and to redress injustices and inequalities. I don't care how boring or dull he is. I'm not into... I think he's quite right in one of his opening speeches to say that he's against that sort of politics of celebrity thing, which Tony Blair definitely fostered and cultivated.
Yeah, you can't see Gordon Brown doing the turn on the Catherine Tate show. He wouldn't do it. He couldn't do it, and...
But a good thing, I think.
Well, it's one thing to be against it, isn't it? It's another thing to be against someone else who's very good at it, which is Cameron, and you can be against it, but you've still got to be able to convince people that you're listening. I think that's one of the fallout from the war is that people do not feel listened to. And I think they know that. I think the Labour Party know that. And so they're doing. Do you remember that thing they had the big conversation? Well, they never listened to anybody then. But now I think, he's going around listening to people. Hello, I'm here, I'm listening to you, which always is a bit patronising.
But isn't that just another version of the window dressing of the big conversation?
I think so.
I'd like to believe it was true and genuine.
I think, if you've been listened to, you have. If you haven't been listened to, you feel it's quite a gut thing that people are expressing. They feel that their views have not been taken into account, and that's why they're looking elsewhere. It's whether the Labour Party can hold together the coalition that brought them in. The local elections, we've just got that north-south divide repeated now, haven't we? So it was obviously the old Labour base has kept fairly solid, but all the people that went to Blair have left. Whether Brown could bring them back. If you'd have asked me 2 years ago, I would have said yes, but today I would say no.
I mean, he does seem to be trying to pull a few rabbits out of the hat. I mean, he's talked about these 5 new eco-cities, which sounds a very good idea. As a member of the Green Party, it sounds exactly the kind of thing that I'd be advocating.
Yeah.
But what it's going to mean in practice, and when it's going to be delivered, and, you know, how it's going to be funded, and, you know, we've heard so many things like this in the past. You know, John Prescott was talking about all these new houses, affordable houses, a few years ago. Where are they?
But I think people are tired, and I think that Brown has got an almost impossible job to do now, and, you know, Blair has made it so that I think it's not just that he's got to produce all these whizzy new policies, but if there's not a leadership challenge, people do not feel that they want to be just given the next Prime Minister because of an agreement in a restaurant in Islington 10 years ago. I mean, people just don't like that. Whether they might like Brown or think he should be Prime Minister, that's a different thing. People do not like that. They do not feel engaged in that process. I mean, even people who have sort of always loved Gordon Brown don't think this is a good thing for him. And I can't see how he doesn't see that. I mean, this is where you wonder about the advisors and the people close to somebody. I mean,
the coronation idea definitely rankles, I think, with a lot of people. You know, I think a lot of people seem to be saying, well, if Labour wants to change its leader, fine, but let's give us, the people, a say.
Yeah. I think all sorts of people are saying that, and even people who aren't very sort of politically engaged just sort of feel you cannot impose. I mean, it is like a coronation, it is like the monarchy, where you just don't have a choice. And you could say, well, everybody knew they were going to get Gordon Brown, but I don't think people did know exactly that they were going to get him maybe for another 2 years.
Mm. I mean, what's your view about the likelihood that he might go to the country in, say, 6 months or a year to try and get a mandate? I mean, obviously,
well,
given the current polls where he's trailing David Cameron, that would probably be pretty suicidal right now. But if he can manoeuvre enough new initiatives, maybe he can start build public confidence. There's
nothing in his history that makes you think he would be bold enough to do it. And I think if he did it, it would be kind of impressive. You know, if he went in a few months' time and thought, well, here I am, you know, take me or leave me. I think that would be quite an impressive thing to do, but I don't think he'll do it.
Not in his cautious, prudent character.
It doesn't seem to be, does it? I mean, at every point in which he sort of could have challenged Blair, he didn't do it directly. I mean, obviously things were going on in the background. I mean, lots of people just see Gordon as a big sulky baby, don't they? And that's not very attractive. You know.
Do you think that's fair, though?
Well, he just.
I think, I'm not in love with the man by any shot, but, you know, I sometimes think he gets
I'm sure
a
he's in love
bad
with you.
rap.
I think he does get a bad rap, but I think that, you know, he could, by doing very little, he could make it a lot better for himself. And, you know, the disappearing acts and all the cliches about him, you want to think, well, there's nothing behind them. But every single cliche, you know, that he disappears, that he doesn't take responsibility, that he has a very small set of advisors, that it's very hard to sort of get into his inner circle. All these things are now said by people who've worked with him for a long time, who respect him. Everybody respects his intellect. I mean, that's not in question. But they do have a lot of problems with the way he works. And
but isn't that part of the process of achieving success? You have to insulate yourself from the people constantly nagging and wanting their tuppence worth. And unless you've got that mental, intellectual space to develop ideas, it's very difficult to come up with new initiatives that actually work.
I mean, that's right. And I think that he, unlike Blair, I think he understood the sort of mechanism of delivering in a much more kind of fundamental way. I mean, Blair would be all just sort of, well, right, we'll do this today. I've got no idea how it's delivered. I think Brown does work out the figures and stuff. But I have to say, I think there's a real problem about the people that surround Brown, because it is still a boys' club. It is, you know, it is a very closed shop. And I think that just as Blair, towards the end, clearly was not advised by anyone who said, come on, Tony, it's really time to go. People have been really fed up with you now for a very long time. You felt, well, there wasn't anyone there left to say it. You feel that Brown takes his advice from people who are going to tell him what he wants to hear. I mean, that's when I've come across them, that's how I feel they are.
I mean, how's your sense with these new initiatives, you know, now that he's announced his leadership bid, how is your sense of how that's going to pan out? For example, the latest one has been possibly reconsidering the voting system.
Yeah, I thought that was the most interesting, in the constitutional reform. I think it's...
I mean, it's an absolute scandal that a Labour government has 55% of the seats in the House of Commons, yet it got only 36% of those who voted, and only 21% support from eligible electors. I mean, that is like the rotten boroughs of the 18th and 19th centuries.
Yeah. No, I mean, if Brown means this stuff and can do it, good luck to him. I'm totally for it. But it's not the kind of policy. It's a policy that people are already engaged will go for. It's not a policy to engage the voters that he needs to engage with. I mean, I think that's where Cameron is pushing buttons at a much more kind of quality of life level that voters kind of understand, even if, you know, it's a lot of it is showmanship. I think constitutional reform, you know, reform of Parliament, it's just...
Isn't democracy part of the whole equation? Because if, as you say, people feel disillusioned and untrusting and so on, isn't it part of the fact that it's because they feel their votes don't count? That, you know, that in really it's about 15,000 voters in Britain in key marginal constituencies decided what government we had.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an extraordinary,
extraordinary
extraordinary indictment of the democratic deficit, and I'm sure that must be part of the reason why people feel they're not listening, because people want to vote and want their votes to count, but they feel that when they do, the electoral system is rigged in favour of the two or three main parties.
Yeah. No, I think. I mean, there's no doubt that if he pulls that off, you know, it'd be a major thing. I just think that people said when he finally gets the leadership, that he's going to have this kind of blitz, isn't he, and have a new policy every day. I mean, I don't know whether we will, but I think he's in, you know...
Labour's own cultural revolution.
Yeah, hopefully, I don't know. But, I mean, I think he's also got to come up with some quite populist things as well in the mix, you know, to counter Cameron, because, like I say, you know, parliamentary reform is something that will engage certain sections of the population, but it won't play necessarily in the bits of for the electorate that he really needs to get back. I mean, I think he really has to get back women voters, you know, Middle England, all that, you know, all the key people, and I think they're looking now at much more sort of quality of life issues, and I think Brown, I don't think that's where his natural sort of kind of
public
empathy.
sector borrowing.
I don't think that's where his sort of empathy is. I mean, I think if it's to do with work, you know, work, because work is the answer, isn't it? In Gordon Brown world, I mean, work is the answer to every single problem.
You got a depression, work harder.
Well, I think it is.
You're poor, work harder.
Yeah, you're a single parent.
It's a good Protestant ethic, you know.
Absolutely, and I think that, you know, that's why the Daily Mail think he's morally, you know, okay. That's why other people have, you know, problems with him. But the push to get everybody out to work, you know, you think you're disabled, you think you need childcare, forget it, get out there and work. You know, we can have no more scrounging and all that kind of thing. I mean, that's, you know, that will pull in some people, but it's a very kind of limited way of looking at life. And I think people also do want to know that, you know, they want a more fully rounded politics. And I suppose, are they looking to a personality that they see as fully rounded? And you know, that's always going to be his problem. You just don't imagine him having a really good time. And that is something that people, I mean, his idea of a good time is up, you know, till 3 a.m. working out endogenous growth or whatever. And that is...
But isn't that our fault? You know, if
Maybe
he's
we
happy
should
doing
be,
that
yes, he should
and
be.
his policies
You're
deliver,
right.
why should we care?
Because when everyone moves to the centre, as you know, there's been this sort of everybody's very close politically. Personality seems to matter much more. I mean, if you look at France, where you've got very different personalities, big personalities as well, big issues about the whole direction of the country. The voters are engaged, they turn out. Here, I mean, there's lots of policies now where they've done it, haven't they? You read them out to somebody in the street and say, who said that? And people don't know if it's Brown, Blair, Cameron, Campbell. They just don't know. They're all saying very, very similar things.
How do you think he's going to square up to David Cameron and Min Campbell?
Well, I don't...
When it comes to an election?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I just don't think there's a lot of squaring up needs to be done with Min Campbell. I'm sorry to say that because I think he's quite good, but I just don't think he's got the sort of buzz anymore. I think he has to be very careful, Brown, because when, they were saying that thing about his clunking fist, and then there was all that kind of jeering in the House of Commons. I mean, that played very badly with many sort of female voters. We don't, the idea that if you disagree with somebody, you just sort of hammer them to death, or in Gordon Brown's case, you bore them to death with you. I mean, that's not exactly an appealing kind of politics, I don't think. You can see why he might, somebody like Harriet Harman would have to come in to be his deputy to sort of soften this sort of image. He will square up to Cameron in the sense that he will sort of, he's clearly got the experience and the intellect to sort of batter him, but I don't know whether battering somebody is always the way to, get people to vote for you. I mean, it's whether, if we want strength, and then most ways in Margaret Thatcher, was the image of this iron woman, and you can admire it, and as you say, you don't have to like it, and you don't have to mind what they do in their spare time. If you're going to vote for strength, then that's one thing. I'm not sure that's what the next election will be about. I mean, I think after Iraq, people are looking for actually someone just to get on with the day-to-day stuff, and
a bit gentler, a bit more consensual.
Well, I think people are still waiting for the apology. I think that would make a huge difference. If I was Cameron now, I'd go for it.
I mean, to me, whatever political hue you are, the big flaw with David Cameron is that he's talked the broad brush, but has not delivered or outlined specific policies. And I get the sense that that's going to be his undoing when it comes to the election. He's not actually going to have... And
the fact that he's a Tory, which was sort of, you can sort of forget that but until you see him with the other ones. And although he's all sort of shiny and brand new and lovely and everybody wants to have a cup of tea with him, he's still surrounded by people who really haven't moved on. And he can't do anything. These are the Tory party. Although, the Tory party is changing. I mean, the conference this year, my police check didn't come through. So I actually spent my time, with lots of activists, Tory party activists, and it was just like being at New Labour and before they got in, entrepreneurial 30-somethings. From talking to them, you would have no idea what party they were in. They just happened to be in the Tory party. And so, it's shifting, but I know those people aren't reflected right through the upper echelons of the party yet. So your
calculation is that much of the grassroots is still dyed-in-the-wool, old-style, bring back Margaret, please.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think it's changing, but it's changing so slowly because they cannot do the things to make it change faster. They will not look at quotas. Whatever Cameron says, his own grassroots kind of undermines him on that.
But does it matter if he's he's able or capable of projecting this, shiny, new, fresh image, these quality of life issues? Does the rather backward-looking constituency association people, do they really matter? Do they count? Will people just look at him and say, okay, he's what's on offer, not them? It would
be an amazing coup to pull that one off, wouldn't it? To just on the strength of one quite charismatic guy to fool the whole country. But it's happened, hasn't it? I think it would be amazing if he did it. I'd rather cut my own head off than vote Tory, but I can see every time I go to the school playground and talk to parents in the playground, all these people keep saying to me, God, I don't know what's happening, but I've sort of found myself agreeing with David Cameron. And, you know, they are the people who have slowly fallen out of love with Labour, but they haven't yet convinced themselves to vote Tory. But they're thinking about it.
That's quite an achievement.
I think it's a huge achievement. And yeah, these are people. Well, some, you know, I've heard lots of public sector workers saying that they voted Labour all their lives, and you know, Iraq was the thing that makes them not be able to do it anymore. And they're very sad about it. They won't necessarily go to the Tories, but they will not vote Labour.
Hopefully, they might vote Green, but
some people will. Yeah, I mean, it will shift. But I mean, I suppose that the whole Brown-Cameron thing. I mean, it will be. In some ways, when Cameron says, you know, he doesn't believe in the state, but he believes in society, well, we know Gordon Brown believes in the state. I mean, that battleground will be quite interesting, I think, because, you know, we've got a state, we're going to have a state. And Cameron, if you sort of actually ask him what he means by that, you know, it all falls apart, because he just relies on things like, well, we'll just bring in the voluntary sector. You know, we won't need all this state funding, you know, the voluntary sector. And you say, well, what are you going to do with drug addicts or something? He doesn't really have, as you say, the policies. I mean, he's got some inkling that he wants to shrink the state, and that will appeal to lots of people. But I don't think he's got any really, no, I don't think he's got the kind of detail there at all.
What do you think, just briefly, what do you think are David Cameron's key strengths and his key weaknesses? Just some summation. Yeah,
well, his strength is just that ability to make people feel listened to, that he's somebody who sort of understands their problems, and that he's a kind of new voice, and that he, you know, the whole, I stayed up in the hospital all night with my son, and I understand, you know, terrible experiences. I mean, I think that works in his favour. His weaknesses are, you know, when you actually work out who he is and realise that he was just sort of trained up like some pedigree dog to rule the world. I mean, I think once people start seeing that, they kind of fall back a bit in shock. But
I mean, he's Mr. Nice Guy, Mr. Average Guy image doesn't square with his tough background.
Not at all.
And people will perhaps see through that in time.
And it looks like, doesn't it, that whereas he's quite reassuring to the sort of south of England, to the north of England on the whole, I mean, to generalise, I am generalising, he's just a typical Tory, and they don't see that he's something different. So, but I think he's genuinely of his generation, just like Blair was. And I think when he says he's comfortable with gay people or whatever, I mean, I think people feel that to be true. I mean, he's not some ideologue.
Okay, well, Suzanne, it's been very good talking with you, and I think the Blair era is drawing to a close very fast. We now open up to a new era of most probably Gordon Brown as Labour Party leader, and we look with great interest to his squaring up against David Cameron. It's going to be a very interesting election. Thank you all for joining us. Please join us next week for another edition of Talking with Tatchell.